Lecture 4 starts with a few of the patient's hypnagogic visions, or visions that take place as one is falling asleep. But I'm going to move straight into the first dream. So in the first dream, the dreamer sees two animals, a mole and a canary. She then cuts both of their claws, but becomes afraid that she's cut them too short and caused them pain. She then frees the bird from its cage, but it doesn't fly away. Jung begins by associating the mole, an animal that burrows under the earth, with going down and with the emotions, which are often thought to originate below the head, in the heart, or in some societies, in the abdomen. And he associates the bird as an animal that flies with the mind and with thought. The latter, he says, interestingly, is domesticated, and one would expect to cut its claws, but the former is a wild animal whose claws would not be in need of cutting. So the interpretation he gives is that the patient's intellect is domesticated and manicured, it's her superior or primary function, and it's within her control, while the feeling function is not, but she tries to treat the feeling function as though it were. Jung remarks, as we noted previously, that the feeling function of the patient is so inferior that it's likely to be in a state of total participation mystique, where the feelings of the patient are so far from consciousness that they appear to her to not be her own, and not only are they not her own, but she tends to believe that they're actually the feelings of other people. So the feelings too, in addition to not being her own, then completely possess her, because she does not know that they're hers and does not have a relationship with them. So her mistake is in not relating to these feelings, in treating the feelings as a thought, as something that can be tamed, whereas the only viable relationship to the feelings is to adapt to them, to establish a connection with them, so they're not somebody else's. And since nothing is moving above ground, the bird does not fly, she must go underground to these feelings. For additional context, Jung remarks that this patient has now reached a stage in her life where her primary function, the function which has allowed her to develop away from the environment she was born into by tearing it down, by using her intellect to carve out a space for herself away from the torments of her inherited sin, or karma as he calls it, or her family's collective unconscious, is no longer suited for the development of her personality. Now, he says, she must take up her inherited consciousness to accept it and to work it out, to complete it, and that can only be done with the new function, with the inferior function, which has been left undeveloped through her prior adaptation. So Jung sets this up in a very interesting way. He says at the beginning of life, we use our primary function in order to get away from our inheritance, our psychological inheritance, and in the second part of life, we come back to that inheritance with the idea that we can complete it in some way. And the way that we can do that is using the inferior function, which has yet to really be used because the primary function has kind of used up all that it has. So in the next dream, the patient sees a woman with a child on her lap, apparently in the medieval era, surrounded by a large crowd over which the mother and child are now somehow elevated. So Jung comments that the context for this dream is first, having followed the mole underground to her feeling somewhere in the collective unconscious. But not only is it in the collective unconscious, but it's in the part of the unconscious because of the medieval imagery associated with a point deep in its own history. Her feeling function, he suggests, is now some 500 years in the past. This is because going down to the collective unconscious means going back in time, and the patient now reaches the bottom of her feeling function in the Catholic Middle Ages. So this is the most undeveloped part of her feeling. And her feeling then has something to do with the medieval Madonna, with the child. It is maternal feeling. So it's noted that she's also moved forward in time, forward from the pagan and primitive Christian initiation by the spirit guide at the intersecting valleys of the previous dream, where she encountered a very old feeling of concern for the pregnant lamb. So having brought that feeling into consciousness and assimilated its meaning, the patient now moves forward in time, and here the dream is telling her something about her maternal feeling. So where the feeling function has been inferior and thought inferior by the patient, it has now been elevated and is asking to be cared for as a mother cares for her child. So the patient is seeing the way that she will take part in the mystery of the mother of the crucified God. And after this, the patient has a brief dream of thrashing wheat, interpreted to represent the harvest for taking on such a role. So in the final dream, someone places a black veil over the back of the dreamer's head, interpreted to represent, and here Jung says he's quoting Augustine, the, quote, black earth not yet fecundated by torrents of rain. And so the black earth is the indispensable initial condition for wheat to grow. But also we note the veil is on the back of the dreamer's head, interpreted to mean a veiling of the unconscious or becoming conscious of the ways the unconscious can constellate a reaction from other people. So it's often said that projection onto another person requires a hook. One projects their own insecurity onto someone who is insecure, or one loves someone because they desire to be loved. And so the idea here may be something like attempting to remain conscious of the ways the dreamer's unconscious could act as a hook for someone else's projections and lead to problems. And so the notion is that the black veil is a veil over the unconscious waiting to be fertilized. Jung also ties this to the Christian idea of being as wise as a serpent, to know one's unconscious and to protect it against the outside world. But the meaning of the symbol of the serpent will be considered more fully later on.